The desert knows those who keep their word. The sun hung low over Juniper Flats like a copper coin balanced on the edge of the world, painting the Arizona territory in shades of rust and gold. Margaret Collins pulled her worn leather satchel across her shoulder and checked the Colt .32 tucked beneath her riding skirt. In this drought-stricken summer of 1876, even a half-Cherokee woman trained in medicine couldn't venture beyond town limits without iron at her side. "Mara," Doc Brennan called from the doorway of his clinic, using the name she preferred. "You sure about heading to Deer Creek alone? Haven't seen proper rain in 2 months. Every living thing out there's getting desperate." She adjusted her wide-brimmed hat against the dying light. "The feverfew won't wait. Doc misses. Patterson's headaches are getting worse, and we're down to our last powder." The old physician frowned, his whiskers catching the amber light. "Apache been spotted near the creek last week. Military's got everyone spooked. I'll be back before full dark." She didn't mention that being half-native sometimes meant she could read signs others missed, or that desperation drove everyone to the same water sources Apache settlers, and medicinal plants alike. The ride to Deer Creek took her through a landscape that seemed to mock human ambition. Saguaro cacti stood like ancient sentinels, their arms raised in silent surrender to the brutal sun. The desert floor, usually carpeted with brittlebush and prickly pear blooms, lay cracked and bare. Even the hardy mesquite trees drooped with thirst. Mara guided her paint mare, Sage, along the narrow trail that wound between volcanic rocks and dry arroyos. The horse's hooves kicked up small clouds of dust that hung in the still air like smoke signals. 23 years of life, first in Georgia among her Cherokee mother's people. Then here in the territories after the fever took her, Mother had taught her to read the desert's moods. Tonight, something felt different. The usual evening chorus of coyotes remained silent. No roadrunners darted between the rocks. Even the ever-present buzzards had vanished from the darkening sky. Deer Creek, when she finally reached it, was a shadow of its former self. What had once been a reliable water source had shrunk to a series of muddy pools connected by trickles. The feverfew she sought grew in the shade of the cottonwoods. Their leaves yellowed, but the flowers still viable. She dismounted and tied Sage to a sturdy branch, then knelt beside the struggling plants. The trap wasn't hidden well. Whoever set it had counted on desperation overriding caution. Steel teeth glinted beneath a thin layer of dust, placed directly on the trail to the deepest pool. Mara's blood chilled. This wasn't Apache work. They had better ways to hunt, older ways that honored the animal's spirit. This crude cruelty bore the mark of the mining company's hired guns. A child's whimper froze her in place. 20 yards upstream, partially hidden behind a cluster of boulders, a small figure struggled against something. Mara approached carefully, hand hovering near her pistol. The boy couldn't have been more than 7 or 8, his dark skin and traditional dress marking him as Apache. His foot was caught in another trap, this one poorly set but effective enough to hold a child's ankle. Blood seeped through his worn moccasin. "Easy," she whispered in Spanish, then tried the few Apache words she'd learned from an old woman who sometimes traded herbs in town. "I help, no hurt." The boy's eyes, wide with pain and terror, fixed on her face. He'd bitten through his lower lip trying not to cry out. Mara's heart clenched. She'd seen that kind of courage before, in children who'd learned too young that noise meant danger. She examined the trap, a smaller version of the ones used for coyotes, its spring mechanism rusty but functional. The boy's ankle wasn't broken, a small mercy, but the teeth had punctured skin, working quickly. She used a stick to wedge open the jaws, careful not to cause more damage. The child didn't make a sound, though tears tracked through the dust on his cheeks. "Brave warrior," she murmured, pulling bandages from her satchel. The feverfew would have to wait. She cleaned the wounds with water from her canteen, precious water in this drought, and wrapped his ankle with practiced efficiency. The boy watched her every move with those 2 old eyes. A whistle, low and musical like a canyon wren's call, drifted across the creek. The child's head snapped toward the sound, hope flickering across his features. Mara's hand found her pistol grip as shadows detached themselves from the gathering darkness. 3 Apache warriors materialized from the landscape like smoke given form, their rifles aimed with deadly precision. The one in the center stood taller than the others, his presence commanding without effort, even in the failing light. She could see the sharp intelligence in his eyes, the way he assessed her position relative to the child, her medical supplies scattered on the ground, the blood on her hands. "Stand up," he said in accented but clear English. "Move away from the boy." Mara raised her hand slowly, leaving her pistol holstered. "He's hurt. Trap got his ankle. I said move." His voice carried the kind of authority that came from being obeyed without question. The rifle never wavered. She stood and stepped back, watching as one of the other warriors quickly examined the child. They exchanged rapid words in their language, gestures indicating the trap, the bandages, her canteen. The boy pointed at her and said something that sounded like a question. The tall warrior studied her for a long moment. In better circumstances, she might have noticed the strong line of his jaw, the way his hair fell loose past his shoulders, the beaded band that marked him as someone of importance. Now, she only saw the calculation in his eyes as he decided her fate. "You are the medicine woman from town," he said finally. Not a question. "Yes." "Why are you here?" She gestured toward the feverfew. "Gathering plants, for healing." She kept her voice steady, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "I found these traps. They're not yours." Something shifted in his expression. "No, not ours." He lowered his rifle slightly. "Who set them?" "Mining company, I'd guess. Same type they use around their camps." She risked a step forward. "That boy needs proper treatment. The wounds need to be cleaned again, stitched if they're deep. I have supplies in town." "You will come with us." It wasn't a request. The warrior who'd examined the boy carefully lifted the child, who whimpered despite his best efforts. Mara's healer's instincts overrode her fear. He shouldn't travel far on that foot. Risk of infection in this heat. The tall one's eyes flashed with something that might have been amusement or irritation. "You think we don't know how to care for our children? I think you want him to have the best chance." She met his gaze directly. A risk with any man, particularly one holding a rifle. "Just like I want my patients to survive. That's why I'm out here alone at sunset. Isn't it because sometimes what we need to do is more important than what's safe to do?" The silence stretched between them, taut as a bowstring. Finally, he gestured to one of his companions, who moved to collect sage. "You will come," he repeated, but something in his tone had shifted. "As a guest, not a prisoner. The boy's grandmother will want to thank you. After that," he shrugged, the gesture oddly elegant despite the weapon in his hands. "We shall see." Mara found herself studying him as they prepared to move. Everything about him spoke of controlled power, the economy of his movements, the way the other warriors deferred to him without seeming subservient, the careful balance between threat and restraint in his manner. "What do I call you?" she asked as she gathered her medical supplies. He considered this. "I am Nathan," he said finally, using what was clearly not his true name. "And you are Margaret Collins, who the Mexicans call Mara, who speaks some Spanish and less Apache, who carries medicine in her bag and iron at her hip." The casual recitation of facts about her life should have been disturbing. Instead, she found herself almost smiling. "You've been watching the town." "The town has been watching us." He gestured toward the traps, some with worse intentions than others. They moved out as full darkness claimed the desert, traveling single file along paths she couldn't see, but which the warriors navigated without hesitation. The injured boy rode with the warrior who'd examined him, occasionally whimpering when the horse's gait jarred his ankle. Each small sound of pain tightened something in Mara's chest. The camp, when they reached it, wasn't what she'd expected. No teepees or temporary structures instead. Wickiups built against the base of the Dragoon Mountains, positioned to catch morning shade and evening breezes. Cook fires glowed like fallen stars, carefully banked to minimize smoke. Women and children moved between the dwellings with purposeful efficiency, though many stopped to stare at the stranger in their midst. An elderly woman emerged from the largest wickiup. Her face a map of years lived hard but not bitter. She took in the scene, her grandson's bandaged ankle, Mara's medical bag, Nathan's carefully neutral expression, and began issuing rapid orders. Within moments, Mara found herself seated by a fire with better light, the boy's ankle across her lap, surrounded by curious faces. "He called you Nathan," she said quietly as she worked, properly cleaning and stitching the deepest punctures. The warrior had positioned himself where he could watch both her hands and the camp's perimeter. "A name for town ears," he admitted. "Here, I am Kaya. And the boy, my sister's son, Carlos." At her surprised look, he added, "Mission name. His grandmother calls him something else, but you wouldn't be able to pronounce it." She tied off the last stitch with steady hands. "Try me." For the first time, she saw him truly smile. It transformed his face, revealing a younger man beneath the warrior's mask. "You speak perhaps 10 words of our language. Badly, but—" He paused, watching as she fashioned a splint from strips of cottonwood bark, patting it carefully. "You have good hands, gentle hands." Heat that had nothing to do with the fire touched her cheeks. She focused on her work, aware of too many eyes watching this interaction. "He'll need to stay off it for at least a week. The wounds need to be kept clean, checked daily for infection." "You will stay tonight," the grandmother said suddenly in heavily accented English. She'd been so quiet, Mara had almost forgotten she understood the language. Too dark now, not safe. Mara looked between the old woman and Kaya. "I need to get back. People will worry." "People will assume Apache killed you," Kaya said bluntly. "Better they worry one night than form a lynch mob based on assumptions." He stood. Decision made. "You are under my protection tonight. In the morning, we will discuss the traps at the water. And perhaps—" His expression hardened. "Perhaps you will tell us why the mining company suddenly feels bold enough to trap our water trails." It was only then that Mara understood she stood at a crossroads far more significant than the literal one that had brought her here. The traps weren't random cruelty. They were a declaration of war over the most precious resource in the desert. And she, Margaret Collins, half-breed medicine woman, had just become a witness to the opening moves of something that would test everyone's survival. The desert wind picked up, carrying the scent of distant rain that would probably never fall. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote finally howled, answered by another, then another, until the night filled with their wild chorus. The boy Carlos had fallen asleep against his grandmother, his small face peaceful despite the pain he'd endured. "I'll stay," Mara said quietly, meeting Kaya's dark eyes across the fire. "And in the morning, I'll tell you what I know about Elias Whitford's plans for Deer Creek." Something flickered in his expression, surprise. Perhaps that she knew the mine supervisor's name, or that she'd offer information so readily. But Mara had made her choice the moment she'd knelt to free a trapped child. In this drought-stricken land where water meant life and death, neutrality was a luxury none of them could afford. The stars wheeled overhead, ancient and indifferent to human struggles, as she settled in for a night that would change everything. Tomorrow would bring hard questions and harder choices. But tonight, she was simply a healer who'd kept a child from losing his foot, sitting by a fire with people who shouldn't trust her but had chosen to anyway. In the distance, thunder rumbled either the promise of rain or the echo of cavalry hooves. In the Arizona Territory of 1876, it was often hard to tell the difference. First night in the Dragoons. The morning star still glimmered above the Dragoon Mountains when Mara woke to the sound of women preparing the cooking fires. Her back ached from sleeping on the ground. cushioned only by a worn blanket that smelled of sage and wood smoke. Through the wiki-up's opening, she could see the camp stirring to life with practiced quiet, a community that had learned to move like shadows even in their own space. "The white medicine woman awakens," a young woman said in Apache. Not knowing Mara understood the simple phrase. Others giggled softly, their curiosity evident despite the wariness in their eyes. Mara sat up slowly, her healer's instincts immediately searching for her young patient. Carlos lay on a pile of furs near his grandmother, his bandaged ankle properly elevated. The old woman whom others called Ada met Mara's gaze and nodded once, acknowledging the unspoken question. The boy had slept through the night without fever. "Come," Ada said in her careful English. "You wash, eat, then we talk." The stream that fed the camp was barely a trickle, carefully channeled into pools for different purposes: drinking, cooking, washing. Even here, hidden in the mountains, water was rationed with religious devotion. Mara cleaned herself quickly, aware of eyes tracking her every movement. She was an oddity here, not quite white, not quite native, existing in the borderland between worlds that neither fully claimed. When she returned to the central fire, Kaya sat with several other men, their faces grave, in daylight. She could see him more clearly, perhaps 30 years old, with the kind of weathered handsomeness that came from living hard under the desert sun. His rifle lay across his lap, and she noticed his fingers never strayed far from it. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a space across from him. Someone handed her a bowl of thin porridge flavored with piñon nuts and dried berries. "Tell us about Elias Whitford." Mara took a careful sip, organizing her thoughts. "He's been supervisor at the Blessed Vein mine for 2 years. Came from back east Pennsylvania, I think has connections to the railroad companies." "We know this," one of the other men interrupted. His face bore old scars, and his eyes held the kind of anger that never quite cooled. "Tell us something useful, woman." "Samuel," Kaya said quietly, but the single word carried enough warning to make the scarred man subside. "To Mara," he added. "Continue." 3 weeks ago, Whitford held a meeting with the town council. Closed doors, but Rosa Delgado, she runs the boarding house. She has ways of learning things. Mara set down her bowl, choosing her words carefully. "He claims your people have been stealing water allocated to the mine. Says he has proof of sabotage to the pump systems." "Lies," Samuel spat. "We take only what has always been ours." "I know," Mara said simply. "But he's convinced the territorial governor to send more troops, and—" She hesitated, then forged ahead. "He's been buying trap supplies, dozens of them. Rosa saw the receipts." The men exchanged looks. Kaya's expression remained neutral, but she caught the slight tightening around his eyes. "When do the troops arrive?" "Within the week, according to Doc Brennan. He heard it from Lieutenant Avery at the fort." She paused. "Avery's a decent man. For a soldier, he's not happy about being pulled into what he calls water politics. Decent men still follow orders." Kaya observed. He studied her for a long moment. "Why do you tell us this, your own people?" "Are they—" Mara interrupted, then caught herself. "I'm sorry, that was—" "Honest," Ada said from behind her. The old woman lowered herself onto a log with careful dignity. "This one knows what it means to have a foot in 2 worlds, neither offering solid ground." She fixed Mara with eyes that seemed to see too much. "Show them your medicine bag, child." Confused, but trusting the elder's wisdom, Mara retrieved her leather satchel. As she unpacked her supplies, bottles of tincture, rolled bandages, packets of herbs, Ada pointed to specific items. "See, she carries willow bark prepared in our way, but also the white man's morphine. Sage bundles blessed by ceremony next to surgical instruments. She is a bridge, whether she chooses it or not." Ada's weathered hand touched Mara's briefly. "The question is, will she be a bridge for peace or for more sorrow?" Before Mara could respond, a commotion arose near the camp's eastern edge. A warrior she hadn't seen before strode through, his face dark with anger. Younger than Kaya, he carried himself with the coiled tension of a rattlesnake ready to strike. "You bring the enemy among us," he demanded in accented English, clearly meant for her ears, "while our water disappears and our children step in their traps." "Christopher." Kaya rose smoothly, his calm a counterpoint to the other man's fury. "She freed Carlos from such a trap. She brings warning of troops. She brings spies' eyes." Christopher's hand moved to the knife at his belt. "How convenient. Finding our injured boy. How noble, offering healing. And now she sits at our fire, learning our numbers, our defenses." "Enough." Kaya's voice cut like obsidian. "She is under my protection." "Your protection?" Christopher laughed bitterly. "As war chief, you protect the people, not pretty half-breeds who—" The sound of Kaya's rifle being cocked stopped him mid-sentence. Nobody had seen him move, but suddenly the weapon was raised, not quite aimed, but ready. The camp fell silent except for the crackling fires. "Challenge my judgment again," Kaya said softly, "and we will settle this in the old way. But not today. Today, we have larger enemies than each other." Christopher's jaw worked furiously, but he stepped back. As he turned to go, he spat at Mara's feet, not quite hitting her, but close enough to make his point. Several women hissed in disapproval, but no one challenged him. "I should go," Mara said quietly. "My presence causes division." "Your presence reveals division already there," Ada corrected. "Christopher speaks for those who believe the old ways are enough. Nathan," she used his Anglo name deliberately, "speaks for those who know we must adapt or die." Kaya set down his rifle and pulled something from a parfleche bag beside him. It was a blanket, woven in the traditional style, but with unusual patterns, geometric designs that seemed to shift and flow like water over stone. He stood and, before Mara could react, draped it around her shoulders. The weight of the gesture hit her immediately. Several people gasped. Christopher, who hadn't gone far, whirled around with fury etched on every feature. "She is under the protection of the chief's blanket," Kaya announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the camp. "Any insult to her is an insult to me. Any harm to her is a challenge to my leadership. This is spoken." "This is madness," Christopher snarled. "For a woman you met yesterday, a woman whose people would see us penned like cattle." "For a healer who risked herself for one of our children," Kaya corrected. "For someone who brings us truth instead of bullets. If we cannot recognize the difference between enemies and potential allies, then we are already lost." The confrontation might have escalated, but Ada raised her hand. Despite having no official authority in the male-dominated council, her age and wisdom commanded respect. "The child wakes," she said simply. "He needs tending." It was an excuse, gracefully offered, for everyone to step back. Mara moved quickly to Carlos's side, grateful for the distraction. The boy's eyes were clear, the swelling already reduced. She checked his wounds with gentle efficiency while feeling the weight of every stare. "It hurts less," Carlos whispered in Spanish, probably thinking she wouldn't understand if he spoke Apache. "You're brave," she replied in the same language. "The bravest warriors know when to admit pain." He studied her with those two wise eyes. "Uncle Nathan gave you his special blanket." "Yes. That means you're family now, but—" He frowned. "Christopher doesn't like family that looks different." From the mouths of children, Mara thought. "Sometimes families disagree," she said carefully, "but they still protect each other." The rest of the morning passed in a strange suspension. Women went about their daily tasks, grinding mesquite pods, repairing baskets, tending the precious garden plots hidden among the rocks. Men checked weapons and discussed patrol routes. Normal life, Mara realized, for people living under constant threat. She helped where she could, using her medical knowledge to treat minor ailments, a child's persistent cough, an elder's arthritic joints, a young mother's infected cut. Gradually, the suspicious looks softened, though she noticed Christopher's faction kept their distance. It was midday when Kaya found her grinding willow bark with Ada's mortar and pestle. The old woman had dozed off in the shade, leaving them momentarily alone. "You didn't have to do that," Mara said without preamble. "The blanket, it puts you at risk with your own people." He settled beside her, close enough that she caught his scent leather and juniper smoke. "Everything puts us at risk now. At least this risk might build something instead of destroying it." "And what are you building exactly?" "I don't know yet," he admitted. "But when I saw you with Carlos last night, you didn't hesitate. No thought of whether helping him might endanger you. No calculation of which side to favor. Just—" He made a gesture she was beginning to recognize, a fluid movement that suggested water flowing around obstacles. Just healing because healing was needed. "It's what I do," Mara said simply. "Yes, but it's not what everyone does." He picked up a piece of bark, examining it with more focus than it warranted. "Tell me about your mother's people." The question surprised her. "Eastern Cherokee. She met my father when he was surveying for the railroad. Scandal on both sides when they married. She kept her hands busy with the grinding. She died when I was 15. Fever took her, along with dozens of others. I couldn't save her." "Is that why you became a healer?" "Partly. Also because it was the only respectable profession where being mixed blood might be overlooked. People care less about your ancestry when you're the only one who can set a broken bone or deliver a baby safely." "But they still care," he observed. "They still care," she agreed. "I'm useful enough to tolerate, not enough to truly accept. Story of my life." "And yet you risk yourself for us." She stopped grinding and met his eyes directly. "A child was hurt. That's not about us or them. That's about—" She struggled for words. "My mother used to say that healing was the only sacred thing left to us after everything else was taken. The only power that creates instead of destroys." Something shifted in his expression. "My mother said something similar. She was a healer too, before the soldiers came to our winter camp." His voice carried old pain, carefully controlled. "She believed healing could change hearts, build bridges. She died trying to help a wounded cavalry scout who repaid her kindness with a bullet." "I'm sorry," Mara whispered. "It was long ago, but I think—" He paused, choosing words with evident care. "I think she would have liked you, would have understood what you're trying to do." A child's laughter broke the moment. Carlos, attempting to walk with a makeshift crutch while his cousins teased him gently. Normal childhood, Mara thought. Even here, even now. "The troops will come," she said quietly. "Whitford won't stop until he controls all the water. And when they find those traps—" "They'll blame us," Kaya finished. "Yes, another excuse to force us onto the reservation." His hand moved unconsciously to his rifle. "Some of my people say we should strike first. Take the war to them before they bring it to us." "Christopher—" "Among others, and they're not wrong. From one view, we've tried peace, treaties written on paper that burns at convenience, promises that evaporate like morning dew." He was quiet for a moment. "But I've seen what total war brings. There are no winners, only different degrees of loss." Mara felt the weight of the blanket around her shoulders, soft wool that carried responsibility heavier than iron. "What will you do?" "What I must. Try to find another way. Use truth against lies, if possible. And if not—" He stood, offering her a hand up. "If not, then at least we'll know we tried." As the afternoon shadows lengthened, a rider approached from the desert, one of Kaya's scouts. The news he brought sent ripples of tension through the camp. Whitford's men had been seen placing more traps, this time along the hidden springs the Apache relied on during their movements. Worse, they were poisoning certain water holes, making them unusable for animals or humans. "He's trying to force a reaction." Mara said during the hurried council that followed. If you retaliate, he has his excuse for the troops. And if we don't, we die of thirst. Christopher countered. How convenient that you're here to counsel patience while your people tighten the noose. Enough, Kaya commanded. We need information more than anger. Where exactly are these new traps? Which springs did they poison? How many men does Whitford have watching? As the warriors debated, Mara felt the pull of two worlds more keenly than ever. She could return to town, pretend she'd been lost overnight, resume her half-life of cautious existence, or, I know where Whitford keeps his records, she heard herself say. Rosa's boarding house. He takes a room there when he's in town, uses it as an office, if there's written proof of what he's doing. It's too dangerous, Kaya said immediately. If you're caught. If I'm caught, I'm a foolish woman snooping where I shouldn't. If your warriors are caught in town, they're hung without trial. She pulled the blanket tighter, drawing strength from its weight. I can get the proof, but I'll need help getting it to someone who matters. Lieutenant Avery might listen, if approached right. The debate that followed was fierce but short. Time was against them all. By sunset, a plan had formed risky, requiring trust on all sides, but offering hope for resolution without bloodshed. As night fell over the dragoons, Mara prepared to return to town, her medical bag restocked, her story rehearsed, her commitment made. Ada pressed a small leather pouch into her hands, protective herbs. She said, though they both knew no medicine could guard against the choices ahead. You could stay, Kaya said quietly as he helped her saddle Sage. No one would force you to go back. And then what, hide here while the world burns around us? She checked the girth strap, avoiding his eyes. My mother's people tried hiding. It didn't save them. Neither did fighting. No, she agreed. But maybe, just maybe, there's a third option. One that requires people willing to stand in the middle, even when both sides shoot at them. He caught her hand as she reached for the reins. When this is over, however it ends, will you come back? The question held layers she wasn't ready to examine. If I'm welcome. You carry my blanket, he said simply. You'll always be welcome. The ride back to Juniper Flats took her through darkness deeper than night. Every shadow could hide a threat. Every sound might herald disaster. But Mara had made her choice. In a land where water meant life and lies meant death, she would carry truth between worlds and hope it was enough. Behind her, the Apache camp settled into watchful rest. Ahead, the lights of town promised a different kind of danger. And somewhere between them, in the spaces where certainty ended and courage began, the future of them all hung in balance. The desert wind whispered secrets to the stars, and Margaret Collins rode toward a dawn that would test every truth she thought she knew. The railroad's dust trail. Dawn crept across Juniper Flats like spilled honey, slow and golden. Mara had been back 3 days, long enough to deflect Doc Brennan's worried questions and establish her story about getting lost after dark. Now she stood in Rosa Delgado's cluttered kitchen, watching the Mexican widow count out receipts by lamplight. 27 bear traps, 15 wolf traps, and something called spring loads that I've never seen before. Rosa muttered, her weathered fingers sorting papers with practiced efficiency. All charged to the Blessed Vein mine account, paid in cash to avoid territorial taxes. You're sure these are legitimate? Mara kept her voice low. The boarding house was beginning to stir, and Whitford himself had a room upstairs. Mija, I've run this place for 12 years. I know every merchant's handwriting, every supplier's mark. Rosa's dark eyes held a mixture of anger and fear. What that man plans to do with so many traps? Nothing good. Mara finished. She carefully folded the most damning receipts and tucked them inside her medical bag. If anyone asks, you were never here. Rosa crossed herself quickly. But Margaret, be careful. Whitford has friends in high places. The railroad company wants that Apache land for the southern route. Water rights are just the excuse. Mara squeezed the older woman's hand in thanks and slipped out the back door. The morning air carried the scent of coffee and bacon from the boarding house, mixing with the ever-present dust and sage. She had to reach Lieutenant Avery before Whitford discovered the missing papers. Fort Lowell sat 5 miles from town, a collection of adobe buildings and wooden barracks that looked as temporary as the peace it claimed to keep. Mara had treated soldiers here before broken bones from bad falls, knife wounds from saloon fights, the occasional fever. The guards knew her, which made entering easy. Finding Avery alone would be the challenge. She was in luck. The lieutenant stood near the parade ground, watching his men drill in the growing heat. Thomas Avery was one of those career soldiers who joined for honor and found only complicated reality too thoughtful for blind obedience, too dutiful for rebellion. His weathered face showed the strain of threading that needle. "Miss Collins." He greeted her with evident surprise. "No medical emergency. I hope—" "Of a sort," she replied carefully. "Might we speak privately? It concerns the upcoming patrol to Deer Creek." His gray eyes sharpened. "What do you know of that?" "More than I should. Perhaps—" "Please, Lieutenant, 5 minutes of your time could prevent bloodshed." He led her to his small office, closing the door firmly. Maps covered one-wall territorial boundaries, water sources, proposed railroad routes. Mara noticed how many red marks clustered around Apache lands. "Whatever you're going to say," Avery began. "Understand that I have orders. The territorial governor himself has been misled." Mara interrupted, pulling out Rosa's receipts. "Look at these, Lieutenant. Dates, quantities, purposes. Whitford is creating the very crisis he claims to solve." Avery studied the papers with growing concern. These show trap purchases going back months, but the Apache raids on the water stations only began. "There have been no raids," Mara said firmly. "Only traps set on traditional water routes, forcing the Apache to seek new sources. When they're seen near the mining operations, it's called theft. When they avoid the area entirely, it's called suspicious behavior. They cannot win a game whose rules change with each move." The lieutenant sat heavily in his chair. "Even if this is true, and I'm not saying it is, what would you have me do? Refuse direct orders? My career would end, and they'd simply send someone else, someone less discriminating." "I'm not asking for refusal, only investigation." Mara leaned forward. "Ride out yourself before the main force. See the traps with your own eyes. Speak to the Apache if they'll allow it. At least then you'll know what kind of war you're being asked to fight." "Speak to the Apache," Avery repeated with a bitter laugh. "They'd put an arrow in me before I could open my mouth." "Not if you came with someone they trust." Understanding dawned in his expression. You're proposing to broker a meeting." "I'm proposing that truth has a chance to be heard before bullets make conversation impossible." She stood, leaving the receipts on his desk. "Tomorrow at dawn, I'll be at Deer Creek gathering herbs, if you happen to patrol in that direction, alone and peacefully intended." "You're asking me to risk everything on the word of a half-breed medicine woman." The slur stung, but Mara had heard worse. "I'm asking you to risk one morning on the possibility that you're an honorable man who'd rather prevent a massacre than lead one." She left him staring at the papers, his face a battlefield of duty and conscience. The rest of the day passed in tense normalcy. Mara treated patients, mixed medicines, and tried not to think about the consequences if Avery chose duty over truth. As sunset approached, a commotion in the street drew her attention. Whitford's men had ridden in hard, their horses lathered with sweat and dust. Apache attacked the southern pump station. One shouted to the gathering crowd, "Burned it complete." Harry took an arrow in the shoulder. Mara pushed through to where they'd laid the wounded man on the boarding house porch. The arrow was Apache-made, but something felt wrong. She'd treated arrow wounds before this one sat too shallow, as if placed rather than shot. "Hold still," she told Harry, one of Whitford's rougher employees. This needs to come out clean." As she worked, she caught the smell of coal oil on his clothes. Fresh coal oil, not old stains. Her hands remained steady as she extracted the arrow, but her mind raced. A staged attack, complete with self-inflicted wounds. Whitford was escalating. "You're lucky," she told Harry as she bandaged his shoulder. "An inch lower and it would have hit lung." "Lucky nothing." Whitford's voice came from above. The mine supervisor stood on the porch steps like a general reviewing troops. "This is war. Boys, they burn our property. We burn theirs. Colonel Morrison's already approved a full sweep, day after tomorrow. We clean out that nest of vipers once and for all." The crowd cheered. Mara kept her eyes on her work, but she felt Whitford's gaze on her. "Fine work as always, Miss Collins," he said with false warmth. "Though I wonder if your healing touch extends to all patients equally. Heard you got lost near Deer Creek few nights back. Dangerous territory for a woman alone." "Dangerous for anyone," she replied evenly. "That's why I stay to the main trails now. Smart woman. Wouldn't want you caught in crossfire when we restore order." His pale eyes held warning and threat. After all, in war, it's often hard to tell friend from foe. That night, Mara barely slept. Before dawn, she saddled Sage and rode out, medical bag heavy with more than supplies. If Avery didn't come, if the attack proceeded as planned, she'd have to warn Kaya somehow. The consequences for her would be severe, but conscience allowed no other choice. Deer Creek looked even more pitiful in the pre-dawn gray. The water had dropped another inch, leaving mineral stains on the rocks like old tears. Mara went through the motions of gathering plants, every sense alert for approaching riders. He came from the east with the rising sun, alone as promised. Avery had traded his uniform jacket for civilian clothes, though his military bearing remained unmistakable. He dismounted slowly, hands visible and empty. "I read the receipts," he said without preamble. "Also found purchase orders in the fort's files for ammunition. Triple our usual requisition. All approved by Whitford's signature. Either we're planning to invade Mexico, or someone expects a prolonged campaign against the Apache." Mara stood, brushing dirt from her skirt. "Will you come with me?" "Do I have a choice?" "There's always a choice. Lieutenant, the question is whether we can live with the ones we make." They rode in silence through the warming morning, following paths Mara had memorized during her night journey. Twice they stopped while she checked landmarks. Grateful Kaya's people had taught her to read the desert's subtle signs. The Apache scouts found them 2 miles from the camp. They materialized from the landscape like ghosts, weapons ready but not aimed. Mara recognized one from her first visit. "I bring the soldier chief who seeks truth," she said in careful Apache. "He comes in peace, with words, not bullets." The scouts exchanged glances. Finally, one gestured for them to follow. The camp had changed in 3 days. More warriors visible. Defenses strengthened. Children kept closer to the wiki-ups. News of the burned pump station had traveled fast. Mara felt the weight of suspicious stares, doubled now that she brought an enemy soldier into their sanctuary. Kaya emerged from the council lodge, and Mara's heart did a strange skip despite the circumstances. He'd painted his face for war-black stripes across cheekbones, red dots on forehead. The gentle man who'd spoken of his mother seemed buried beneath the warrior chief's mask. "Lieutenant Avery," Kaya said in perfect English, "you have courage or foolishness to come here." "Perhaps both," Avery admitted. "Miss Collins says you have truth to share. I'm willing to listen." What followed was the strangest military briefing Mara had ever witnessed. Maps drawn in the dirt, water sources marked with stones, trap locations indicated by twigs. Kaya's warriors brought physical evidence the very traps Whitford's men had set, some still bearing purchase tags from town merchants. "We did not burn the pump station," Kaya stated flatly. "Why would we destroy water sources when water is life itself? Your man Whitford burns his own property to justify war against us." Avery studied the evidence with growing dismay. Even if I believe you, and I'm not saying I do, the attack has been reported. Colonel Morrison has his orders. The day after tomorrow, you will attack our camp. Kaya finished. Women and children included. No doubt, the usual way of making war against those who cannot vote or testify in your courts. I don't make policy, Chief. I follow orders. So did the soldiers who killed my mother, Kaya said quietly. Good men, following orders. Tell me, Lieutenant, does following orders help you sleep when you dream of dead children? The question hung in the desert air like a curse. Avery's face had gone pale beneath its tan. What would you have me do? Bear witness, Mara interjected. You've seen the truth. When the attack comes, remember it. Perhaps you cannot stop what will happen, but you can ensure the real story survives. Christopher appeared, fury radiating from every line of his body. He spoke rapid Apache to Kaya, gesturing violently toward the visitors. Mara caught enough words to understand he wanted them held as hostages against the coming attack. No, Kaya said firmly. They came under flag of truce. They leave the same way. Your weakness will kill us all, Christopher snarled in English, clearly wanting the visitors to understand. This woman has bewitched you, made you soft when we need strength. Strength without wisdom is just destruction. Kaya replied, We are not the monsters they paint us as. We will not become so just to prove them right. As they prepared to leave, Kaya drew Mara aside. You took a great risk bringing him here. The risk of doing nothing was greater. She hesitated, then asked quietly, What will you do when they come? What we have always done. Survive. The camp will scatter into the deep canyons. Some will die, but the people will endure. His hand brushed hers briefly. Your blanket remains here. When this storm passes, it will be waiting. The ride back was silent until they reached Deer Creek. There, Avery finally spoke. I cannot stop the attack, but perhaps I can influence its direction. If your Apache friends were to abandon the main camp, leave obvious signs of heading south toward Mexico, while actually going north into the mountains, Mara finished, you'd follow the false trail. My scouts might be remarkably poor at reading signs. Might take us days to realize our error. He met her eyes directly. I can give them time, nothing more. Time might be enough, she thought quickly. But Whitford won't be with the military force. He'll use the distraction to seize the water sources permanently, set up armed positions, maybe even dam what's left of the creek. One crisis at a time, Miss Collins. Avery mounted his horse, looking older than his years. You've shown me truth today. What I do with it, God help me, I no longer know what's right, only what might be less wrong. As he rode away, Mara allowed herself one moment of hope. It wasn't much, a few days' grace, a soldier's troubled conscience, a truth shared across enemy lines. But in a land being torn apart by lies and greed, even small mercies mattered. She had one more day to prepare. One day to warn Kaya's people, to help them vanish into the landscape that had sheltered them for generations. One day before Whitford's war came to Deer Creek and changed everything forever. The sun climbed higher, indifferent to human schemes, but for the first time in days, Mara thought she smelled rain on the wind. Change was coming to the drought-stricken land, one way or another. She turned sage toward the hidden paths once more, carrying the word of both danger and hope. The desert received her like an old friend, keeping its secrets and offering its harsh sanctuary to all who knew how to listen to its whispers. Tomorrow would bring violence and sorrow, but today, truth had been spoken in the shadow of the dragoons, and two worlds had found a moment of understanding in the space between war and peace. Testimony under the new moon. The fort's meeting room smelled of tobacco and lamp oil, bitter coffee and the sweat of men who'd rather be anywhere else. Mara stood before the assembled officers, her medical bag at her feet. Rosa's receipts spread across the scarred wooden table like accusations written in ink and greed. These proved nothing, Colonel Morrison declared, his florid face already flushed with the morning's whiskey. Receipts for traps. Every ranch and mine in the territory uses them for predators. Predators with 2 legs, apparently. Mara responded evenly. Look at the dates. Colonel, the purchases began months before any reported Apache activity near the water sources. Coincidence. But Morrison's eyes didn't meet hers. Lieutenant Avery stood near the window, his testimony already given and dismissed. He'd reported the evidence from the Apache camp, the false trail preparations, everything except the exact location of where Kaya's people had relocated. That secret he kept, though Mara could see the weight of it in his rigid posture. Miss Collins. Whitford spoke from his chair in the corner, voice smooth as snake oil. You seem remarkably well informed about Apache movements, almost as if you've had recent contact with them. The threat hung unspoken but clear. Mara lifted her chin. I'm a healer, Mr. Whitford. I go where healing is needed, as you well know. After all, I treated your man Harry just yesterday. Interesting how shallow that arrow wound was. Almost as if someone had carefully placed it to avoid real damage. Whitford's eyes narrowed. Are you suggesting? I'm suggesting nothing. Merely observing that in my medical experience, combat wounds rarely show such considerate placement. She turned back to Morrison. Colonel, you have evidence of a manufactured crisis. What you do with that knowledge determines whether you're remembered as a peacekeeper or a pawn. Watch your tongue, woman. Morrison growled. Your mixed blood doesn't give you the right to question military decisions. My citizenship gives me that right, Mara shot back. Or does the Constitution not apply in the territories? The room erupted in angry voices. Through it all, Whitford watched her with calculating eyes, and Mara knew she'd made a dangerous enemy. But as Ada had said, she was already walking between 2 worlds. Adding another threat to the list hardly mattered. The meeting ended as she'd expected, with nothing resolved and the attack still scheduled for dawn. But seeds of doubt had been planted. She saw it in the uncertain glances between junior officers, in Avery's grim determination, in the way Morrison's hand shook slightly as he reached for his glass. Outside, the afternoon sun hammered down mercilessly. Mara had barely reached her horse when hoofbeats announced an unwelcome visitor. Christopher sat atop a painted pony, his face dark with barely controlled rage. You, he spat. Because of you, we scatter like rabbits. Because of you, our chief grows soft. Because of me, you have warning, Mara countered. Would you prefer surprise at dawn? I would prefer to fight. He wheeled his horse closer, close enough that she could see the desperation beneath his anger. Do you know what it means to run again and again, pushed from water to water, land to land? My grandfather's grandfather knew this place when your people were still across the great water, and now we flee because Nathan believes a half-blood's promises. Not my promises, the truth. She gentled her voice, recognizing pain beneath his fury. Fighting the army directly means annihilation. You know this. Better to die as warriors than live as beggars. But his voice cracked slightly on the words. Better still to live free. A new voice interjected. Sarah, one of the Apache women who'd been kind during Mara's stay, emerged from the mesquite grove. Her infant son slept in the cradleboard on her back. Christopher, your pride will not feed our children or bring water from stones. Christopher's jaw worked furiously. And her promises will... Her warnings might keep us alive long enough to find another way. Sarah's dark eyes moved between them. The council has decided we move tonight, split into 3 groups. You lead the warriors north. Nathan takes the families through Devil's Canyon. The elders go west to the sacred caves. Divided, we're weak, Christopher protested. United, we're a single target, Sarah countered. Go, Your band waits." After he rode off, Sarah turned to Mara. "He's not evil, only afraid. Fear makes us all foolish sometimes." "I know." Mara hesitated, then pulled a small leather pouch from her bag. "Willow bark extract, concentrated. For the children during the journey. Mountain nights are cold, and small ones get fevered easily." Sarah accepted the medicine with formal gravity. "Nathan asked me to give you this." She produced a small object wrapped in soft leather. "He says you'll understand." After Sarah left, Mara unwrapped the gift. It was a piece of turquoise, deep blue shot through with veins of copper, carved into the shape of a water drop. A hole had been drilled through the top for a leather cord. She understood immediately water and sky. The two things no one could own but everyone needed. Hope made solid. She had it around her neck and hidden beneath her collar when she returned to town to find chaos brewing. Word of the morning meeting had spread. Twisted in the telling. Some claimed she was an Apache spy, others that she'd been bewitched or worse. Doc Brennan met her at the clinic door, his face grave. "Pack what you need," he said without preamble. "Take only what matters." "Doc, they burned Rosa's boarding house an hour ago. Said they found Apache sign there, evidence of collaboration." His weathered hands shook as he handed her a travel bag. "She got out, but barely. Whitford stirring folks to violence, and you're next on his list." Through the window, Mara could see smoke rising from the direction of Rosa's place. Years of memories, decades of careful neutrality, reduced to ash because she dared speak truth. Where is she? Catholic Church. Father Miguel's protecting her, but even sanctuary has limits here. Doc pressed a small purse into her hands. "Your wages, plus what I could spare. There's a stage heading to Tucson at midnight. Be on it." "I can't just leave. You can't help anyone dead." His voice broke. "I've watched this town's soul rot bit by bit. Won't watch them destroy the best healer I've trained. Your mother would haunt me eternal." Mara's throat closed. Doc had rarely mentioned knowing her mother, though she'd suspected. "She'd haunt me worse if I ran from doing what's right." "Then do what's right from somewhere they can't lynch you for it." He pulled her into a brief, fierce hug. "Go! I'll tend what needs tending here." Mara packed quickly but carefully medical supplies, her mother's journal, the few possessions that mattered. As darkness fell, she slipped through town toward the church. Angry voices carried from the saloons, ugly words about race mixing and Apache lovers. Whitford had lit a fuse that would burn until it found something to explode. The church stood like an adobe fortress against the night. Father Miguel, ancient and indomitable, met her at the door. "Rosa's in the back room. She asks for you." Rosa sat wrapped in a borrowed shawl, soot still streaking her face, but her eyes blazing with undiminished fire. "Mia," she said simply, opening her arms. They held each other while Rosa wept for her lost home, her documented life, her carefully built respectability. 20 years of receipts," she whispered. 20 years of proving I belonged. Gone. "You still have what matters," Mara said gently. "Your life, your memory, your courage." "My memory?" Rosa pulled back, suddenly urgent. "Yes, my memory that knows where Whitford keeps his real records. Not the public ones, the private ledger. The one that shows payments from the railroad company for clearing obstacles." Mara's pulse quickened. "Where?" "The old mine office, the collapsed one near Calvary Hill. He thinks no one knows, but I followed him once." Rosa gripped Mara's hands. "If someone could get that ledger to the territorial governor." "Someone's about to try." Mara stood, mind already racing. "The stage doesn't leave for hours. Enough time." "Enough time to get killed," Rosa protested. "Mara, no. You risked everything for truth. So did Kaya's people. So did Lieutenant Avery. Am I less than any of you?" She squeezed Rosa's hands once more, If I'm not back by midnight, get on that stage yourself. Promise me." The abandoned mine office squatted against Calvary Hill like a broken tooth. Half its roof had collapsed in a long-ago storm, and most folks gave it wide berth, claiming it was haunted by miners who died in a cave-in. Perfect for hiding secrets. Mara tethered Sage in a grove of Palo Verde trees and approached on foot. The quarter moon provided just enough light to navigate the rubble. The intact portion of the building was locked, but Doc's medical training had included getting into places quickly when patients couldn't answer doors. The lock yielded to her probe after long, tense minutes. Inside, dust and neglect masked recent disturbance, but their fresh boot prints leading to what looked like a solid wall. Mara felt along the boards until she found the catch. The hidden compartment opened to reveal exactly what Rosa had promised: ledgers, correspondence, and maps showing planned railroad routes directly through Apache water sources. She was photographing pages with shaking hands when hoofbeats thundered outside. No time to replace everything perfectly. She grabbed the most damning ledger and a handful of letters, stuffing them into her medical bag. The secret door wouldn't close properly, evidence of her presence. But nothing to be done. Voices outside, Whitford's among them. Mara crept to the collapsed section, praying the rubble would hide her escape. Boards creaked ominously under her weight, almost clear when her foot went through rotten wood with a crack like a rifle shot. "There!" someone shouted. "In the ruins!" Mara ran behind her. Men with torches spread out to cut off escape routes, but she knew something they didn't. Doc had shown her the old smugglers' trails that led through the hill's backside. If she could reach the narrow canyon, a figure stepped from the shadows ahead. Rifle raised, Mara's heart stopped. Then Christopher lowered his weapon, his face unreadable in the moonlight. "This way," he said curtly. "Quickly!" Too stunned to question, she followed him into a crack in the rock face she'd never have seen. Behind them, Whitford's men shouted in frustration as they lost the trail. Christopher led her through passages that seemed impossible, squeezing between stone walls that scraped skin raw. They emerged on the far side of Calvary Hill, where 2 Apache ponies waited. "Ride," Christopher commanded. "I'll lay false trails." "Why?" Mara gasped. "You hate me." "I hate what you represent," he corrected. But Nathan was right. You risk everything for truth, even when your own people turn against you. That is, he paused, searching for words. That is worthy of respect, even from enemies. He vanished back into the rocks before she could respond. Mara rode hard for the church, the ledger burning like a brand in her bag. Dawn was coming, and with it, the attack on the scattered Apache bands, but she had proof that might not stop today's violence, but could prevent tomorrow's. Father Miguel had friends among the Mexican traders, men who knew routes beyond Whitford's reach. As the first light touched the eastern mountains, Mara found herself in a wagon headed not to Tucson, but to Fort Huachuca, where honest officers still outnumbered corrupt ones. Rosa rode beside her, both of them bruised by loss, but not broken. "What will you do?" Rosa asked, as Juniper Flats disappeared behind them. Mara touched the hidden turquoise at her throat. "Tell the truth, again and again, to anyone who'll listen. And when the dust settles, you'll go back to him." It wasn't a question. "To them," Mara corrected gently. "I made promises. To Ada, to Sarah, to the children who need healing." She paused. "And yes, to him. A blanket waits for me, and I intend to claim it." The wagon rolled on through the breaking day. Behind them, smoke rose from Deer Creek as the attack commenced. Ahead lay uncertain sanctuary and the hope that truth, once spoken, could not be entirely silenced. In her bag, alongside the damning ledger, lay her mother's journal, the last entry, which Mara had read so many times she knew it by heart, seemed especially fitting now. "Between two worlds is not an empty space, but a bridge, and bridges, my daughter, are how people find each other across impossible divides. The desert received the new day with its usual indifference, but for those who knew how to listen, the wind carried whispers of change. Storm clouds gathered on the horizon, the drought's end coming at last, bringing with it all the chaos and cleansing that such transformations demanded. Mara closed her eyes and let the wagon's rhythm lull her into half-sleep. Wherever Kaya was now, whatever the day brought, she'd done what she could. The rest lay in hands stronger than hers, the hands of truth, working its slow but inexorable magic on the world. "Pretend you're mine tonight." The aspen grove stood like a sanctuary in the Chiricahua highlands, silver bark ghostly in the starlight. Mara pressed her back against the rough trunk, trying to slow her hammering heart. 3 days since Fort Huachuca. 3 days of testimony, documentation, and promises of investigation that felt hollow as old bones. She'd slipped away at dusk, drawn by word that Kaya's band had taken shelter in these mountains. Now Whitford's hunters tracked her through the darkness, their torches flickering like angry stars between the trees. She'd been foolish to think she could find the Apache camp alone. More foolish still to believe her testimony had ended anything. Men like Whitford didn't accept defeat, they simply changed tactics. A hand covered her mouth from behind. Before she could struggle, a familiar voice whispered against her ear, "Be still, they pass soon." "Kaya!" Relief flooded through her so strongly her knees nearly buckled. He kept his hand gentle but firm over her lips until the voices faded eastward, then slowly released her. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly, though his eyes betrayed gladness that contradicted the words. "Neither should you. The false trails were supposed to lead them south. Whitford hired Apache scouts, turncoats who know our ways." His face was drawn with exhaustion. War paint faded but still visible. "We lost 2 warriors covering the family's escape. Good men." "I'm sorry." The words felt inadequate. "I tried the ledgers. The testimony—" "I know." He touched her face briefly, fingertips ghosting over a scratch on her cheek. "Christopher told me what you did, what it cost you." "A small price compared to—" She stopped, hearing voices again, closer now. Without speaking, Kaya took her hand and led her deeper into the aspens. They moved in perfect silence, his knowledge of the terrain guiding them through paths she couldn't see. The ground climbed steeply, air growing thin and cold. Her riding skirt caught on undergrowth, her boots slipped on loose stone, but Kaya's grip never faltered. They climbed until the trees thinned and stars pressed close overhead. A shallow cave, really just an overhang of rock, offered minimal shelter. Kaya pulled her inside just as clouds swept across the moon, plunging them into complete darkness. "We wait," he murmured. "They won't climb this high in darkness." Mara couldn't see him, but she felt his warmth, smelled the sage and wood smoke that clung to his clothes. They sat close together on the cold stone, listening to the night. Far below, hounds bayed. Whitford had brought tracking dogs. "Your people?" she asked quietly. "Safe, scattered but safe. The families reached the winter caves. Warriors guard all approaches." He paused. "I should be with them." "Why aren't you?" "Because I heard you were riding alone through hostile territory like a fool." She could hear the smile in his voice despite the reproach. "Someone had to make sure you lived to be foolish another day." "My hero?" she said, attempting lightness. But her voice shook. The truth was setting in how close she'd come to capture, or worse, how hopeless their situation remained despite all efforts. "Mara." He found her hands in the darkness. "Why did you come back?" So many answers crowded her throat. Because the fort's promises rang false. Because Rosa was safe, but she couldn't be. Because something pulled her back to these mountains like a compass finding north. "I promised," she said simply. "A blanket waits for me." His hands tightened on hers. "That blanket comes with considerable complications." "I've noticed." She laughed shakily. "Hunted through the woods, hiding in caves, freezing on a mountain. The romantic poems never mentioned these parts. No. He shifted closer, and suddenly his arm was around her, pulling her against his side. Clearly you've been reading the wrong poems. The cold that had been seeping into her bones retreated. She let herself lean into him, temple resting against his shoulder. Tell me one of yours. Then, the Apache must have poems about impossible situations. We have stories. Different thing. His free hand found her face in the darkness, thumb tracing her cheekbone. There's one about Coyote, who fell in love with a star. Every night he sang to her. Every night she shone for him alone. But they could never touch. He was bound to earth, she to sky. That's sad. Wait. His voice dropped lower, intimate in the darkness. One night, all the spirits gathered for a great ceremony. For just that one night, the boundaries between worlds grew thin. Star came down, Coyote climbed up, and they met in the pine trees, in that space between earth and sky. What happened? Different tellers say different things. Some say they had just that one night before returning to their places. Others say they found a way to meet whenever the boundaries thinned. But all agree on one thing, that one night was worth all the longing before and after. Mara's heart beat so loud she was certain he must hear it. Is that what this is, one night between worlds? I don't know. His hand slid into her hair, loosening the pins that held it proper. But if it is... A sound below made them both freeze, footsteps on stone, deliberate and searching. Kaya moved so fast she barely registered it. Positioning himself between her and the cave entrance, knife appearing in his hand. Nathan, Christopher's voice, pitched to Carrie without echoing. Found your trail. They're circling back with Dawn. We need to move. Kaya relaxed fractionally. How many? 12 men, 6 dogs. Whitford leads them himself. Christopher appeared at the cave mouth, barely visible in the starlight. His eyes found Mara, and his expression hardened. You led them here. I led them away from the families, Kaya corrected. As planned. Planned. Mara started to stand, but Kaya's hand on her shoulder kept her seated. You used yourself as bait. Someone had to draw their attention. He shrugged. A war chief protects his people. By getting yourself killed. By doing what's necessary. He turned to Christopher. The canyon route. Blocked. They're not fools. Christopher's gaze shifted between them. There is another way. But... Speak. The old bride path. Through the slot narrows. It leads out, but... He grimaced. It requires trust. Complete trust. One person must lead, the other follow blind, in darkness, with hunters close. Understanding passed between the men. The bride path traditionally used in marriage ceremonies, where a woman followed her husband-to-be through dangerous passages, trusting him completely with her life. The symbolism wasn't lost on any of them. I'll take her, Christopher offered stiffly. You know the rear guard better? No. Kaya's voice brooked no argument. She follows me, or not at all. Mara stood then, decision made. I'll follow. They prepared quickly. Christopher would lay false trails, buying time. Kaya wrapped Mara's light-colored blouse in his dark jacket, making her less visible. He tied a leather cord between them, traditional for the bride path, ensuring the follower couldn't be lost in the darkness. Listen, he said urgently. The path is narrow, sometimes only inches wide. There are drops, fatal ones. You must step exactly where I step, move exactly as I move. No hesitation, no looking down. Can you do this? Yes. He studied her in the dim light. If they catch us in the narrows, there's no fighting room, no escape. Then we'd better not get caught. Something shifted in his expression. Suddenly, he pulled her close, one hand cupping the back of her head. Mara, if this is our Coyote and Star Night, don't... She pressed fingers to his lips. Don't say goodbye. We're going to make it through. Find your people. Figure out what comes next. Together." He kissed her fingers, then her palm, then pulled her properly into his arms. "Pretend you're mine tonight," he whispered against her hair. "Just tonight. Pretend there are no sides, no wars, no impossible divides. Just us in this space between worlds." "I'm not pretending," she whispered back. He held her close, kissing her with gentle fire, soft at first, as if she might break or disappear. She pressed closer, hands finding his face, trying to memorize the moment. The kiss deepened, speaking all the words they couldn't say, the fear, the hope, the wild impossibility of what bloomed between them. When they broke apart, both breathing unsteadily, Kaya rested his forehead against hers. "Ready?" "Lead on." The bride path earned its name immediately. In daylight, it might have been merely terrifying. In darkness, with only starlight and Kaya's sure feet to guide her, it became an exercise in absolute faith. The cord between them stayed taut as he led her along ledges where one wrong step meant death. "Step high," he murmured. "Root crossing. Now duck, overhang. Good." Her world narrowed to his voice, the tension in the cord, the precise placement of feet on invisible ground. When pebbles scattered into unseen depths, she didn't look. When the path narrowed until her shoulders brushed both walls, she didn't panic. Step by step, breath by breath, she followed. Behind them, the dogs howled closer. Torchlight flickered on the canyon walls. The hunters had found the entrance, but they'd have to proceed slowly, carefully. The path killed the careless without prejudice. "Almost through," Kaya encouraged. "The worst is behind." His words cut off in a grunt of pain. The cord went slack. Mara's heart stopped. "Kaya." "Arrow," he gasped. "Shoulder. Keep moving." In the faint light, she could see him pressed against the canyon wall, an arrow shaft protruding from his left shoulder. Blood, black in the darkness, already soaked his shirt. One of Whitford's Apache scouts had gotten close enough for a shot. "Can you—" "Go," he pushed her ahead with his good arm. "The path widens ahead. Run." Instead, she grabbed his good arm, draping it over her shoulders. "Together or not at all." They stumbled forward, Mara half carrying him as the path finally opened into a wider canyon. Behind them, shouts echoed. The hunters had reached the narrows but couldn't pursue quickly. It bought them minutes, no more. A stream bed, dry but sandy, offered easier travel. They followed it, Kaya's breathing increasingly labored. When he stumbled, nearly taking them both down, Mara made a decision. "Here," she said, guiding him into a cluster of boulders. "Let me look." "No time." "There's always time to not die." She examined the wound by touch. The arrow had struck high, missing the lung but deep in muscle. "This has to come out."
Later."
"Now?" She pulled her medical supplies from her bag, blessedly still with her through everything. "Bite this." She handed him a leather strap. "This will hurt." To his credit, he barely made a sound as she pushed the arrow through and out the back, easier than pulling barbed points backward. She packed the wound with herb paste and wrapped it tightly, working by feel and instinct. "You're lucky," she said. "Clean penetration. No major vessels hit. Though we need—" Hoofbeats thundered up the stream bed. Too late. They'd been found. Kaya struggled to stand. Reaching for his knife, Mara grabbed her pistol. Though she knew it was useless against so many, they pressed together in the boulder's shadow, preparing for a last stand. But the rider who appeared wasn't Whitford. Lieutenant Avery, dust-covered and grim, reined in his lathered horse. "Thank God," he breathed. "Thought I was too late." "Lieutenant," Mara lowered her weapon, confused. "How—" "Your testimony reached the right ears. Finally, the governor's ordered Whitford's arrest, the water rights restored." He swung down from his horse. "But Whitford's gone rogue. He's not following anyone's orders now, just wants blood." We need to get you both somewhere safe." "My people," Kaya started, "are under military protection as of noon today. Official treaty pending, but the governor's serious about peace." Avery's eyes were kind but urgent. "Can you ride?" They made it to Avery's small patrol camp as dawn broke rose and gold across the mountains. While the fort surgeon tended Kaya's wound properly, Mara sat wrapped in a military blanket, watching the sun paint the world new. Christopher arrived with midday, suspicious but relieved to find his chief alive. The news he brought was mixed. Whitford had vanished into Mexico. His hired guns scattered. The Apache bands were gathering at Deer Creek, where water flowed freely again. "It's not over," Christopher warned. "Paper promises from your government mean little." "But it's a start," Kaya said from where he lay recovering. "Sometimes that's all we get a chance to begin." That evening, as Mara changed Kaya's bandages in the privacy of a tent, he caught her hand. "Stay," he said simply. "Not for a night between worlds, but for all the days in this one." "I'm marked now," she warned. "Whitford has friends. There'll always be those who see me as a traitor to my race. And some of my people will always see you as an outsider." He brought her hand to his lips. "But others will see what I see, a bridge. A future where children like Carlos can be both Apache and American without choosing sides. That's a heavy burden for one person. Then we carry it together." He pulled her down beside him, careful of his shoulder. "The blanket still waits. Will you accept it?" Mara thought of all the reasons to say no, the danger, the difficulty, the weight of being forever between worlds. Then she thought of Carlos's trusting eyes, of Ada's wisdom, of Sarah's courage, of this man who'd led her through darkness on faith alone. "Yes," she said, and kissed him as the stars came out over the Chiricahuas. Outside, coyotes sang to the rising moon, and somewhere between earth and sky, in that space where boundaries thin and impossible things become real, two hearts found their way home. The trial between sand and stone. The garrison courthouse at Fort Lowell had never seen such a gathering. Apache, Mexican, Anglo, all crowded into the adobe building as October heat hammered down like a fist. Mara sat in the witness section, her hands folded over the medical bag that had become her shield and weapon. 3 weeks since the night in the Aspens, and everything had led to this moment. At the defendant's table, Elias Whitford sat with practiced arrogance, though sweat beaded his pale forehead. He'd been captured trying to cross into Sonora, brought back in chains that he wore like martyrdom. His lawyers sent by the railroad companies flanked him like well-dressed vultures. "This hearing will come to order," Colonel Morrison commanded, though his voice lacked its usual authority. The governor had sent a special prosecutor from Tucson, a sign of how seriously the territory took these proceedings, or perhaps how badly they wanted the matter settled before it drew federal attention. Kaya entered with his delegation Christopher, 2 elder council members, and Sarah carrying her infant son. His shoulder had healed well under Mara's care, though he still moved carefully. He wore a mixture of traditional dress and Anglo clothing, a visual statement of the bridge they were all trying to build. "Mr. Whitford stands accused of conspiracy to defraud, incitement to violence, and attempted murder." The prosecutor began. "We will show that he deliberately manufactured conflict to seize Apache water rights for private gain." "Yeah, preposterous," Whitford's lawyer interrupted. "My client protected legitimate mining interests from savage raids." The crack of gunfire cut him off. The windows exploded inward as men on horseback fired into the courthouse. Mara threw herself down, glass shards raining over her. Screams, chaos, the acrid smell of powder smoke. "Christopher, no!" Through the melee, Mara saw Christopher lunge across the room, knife flashing toward Whitford. Kaya moved to intercept him, catching his warrior's wrist inches from the mine supervisor's throat. "This isn't justice," Christopher snarled, struggling against his chief's grip. "No," Kaya agreed grimly, But it's what we have. Soldiers poured in, quickly subduing the exterior attackers Whitford's remaining hired guns, making a desperate play to free their employer. In the confusion, one figure moved with different purpose. A man Mara recognized as one of Whitford's Apache scouts raised an already drawn pistol toward Kaya's back. "Nathan!" The old mission name tore from her throat as she grabbed the nearest object, a heavy law book, and hurled it. The tome struck the gunman's arm, sending his shot wide. Lieutenant Avery's rifle butt finished the job, dropping the would-be assassin. "Well," the prosecutor said dryly as orders slowly returned, brushing glass from his papers. "I believe we've just witnessed evidence of the defendant's violent intentions." The trial proceeded with armed guards at every window. Witness after witness testified Rosa with her saved receipts, soldiers who'd questioned their orders, even some of Whitford's own men who'd turned state's evidence for lighter sentences. Then came Mara's turn. She took the stand, aware of every eye upon her, some hostile, some hopeful, all judging. "State your name for the record." "Margaret Collins, Mara. I serve as a healer in Juniper Flats." She kept her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Miss Collins, tell us about the night you found the Apache boy in the trap." She told it simply, without embellishment. The child's pain, the crude traps, her certainty they weren't Apache-made. When Whitford's lawyer tried to paint her as biased, she met his attacks with medical facts and quiet dignity. "You seem quite sympathetic to the Apache," the lawyer sneered. "Some might say unnaturally so." "I'm sympathetic to anyone who suffers unjustly," Mara replied. "My oath as a healer knows no racial boundaries." "Yet you wear their blanket, accept their protection, share their—" He paused suggestively. "Hospitality." Heat rose in her cheeks, but she held his gaze. "Yes, I wear the blanket of a people who sheltered me when my own community burned my friend's home. I accept protection from those who value truth over profit, and I share hospitality with anyone who offers it honestly, including their chief, this Nathan, or Kaya, or whatever he calls himself." The prosecutor objected, but damage was done. Mara lifted her chin. "Chief Kaya saved my life multiple times. He's shown more honor than many who claim civilization as their birthright. If that makes me biased, so be it. I'm biased toward courage, truth, and justice. The court must decide if those qualities matter here." When she stepped down, she caught Kaya's eye. The warmth there steadied her shaking knees. The most dramatic moment came when Sarah took the stand. The baby fussed in her arms, and she soothed him with practiced ease while answering questions about the burned pump station. "I was gathering plants near there that day," she testified through a translator. "I saw Whitford's men setting the fires themselves. Saw Harry put the arrow in his own shoulder, laughing about fooling everyone." "Lies," Whitford burst out. "No one would believe a squaw over—" Sarah switched to accented but clear English. "This squaw speaks your language. Mr. Whitford. I understood every word when you planned to blame us. Every word when you said dead Apaches would make the railroad men happy." The baby began crying in earnest. Without hesitation, Sarah adjusted her shawl and began nursing him right there in the witness box. Several Anglo women gasped at the impropriety, but Sarah remained serene. "My son needs food," she said simply. "Just as all our children need water. That's what this man tried to steal the future of our babies. For that, any mother would speak truth, no matter who calls her liar." The courtroom fell silent except for the infant's contented sounds. Even Whitford's lawyers seemed momentarily struck dumb by the primal honesty of the moment. Kaya testified last, speaking in measured English about the systematic poisoning of water sources, the strategic placement of traps, the attempts to provoke violence. When asked about his intentions toward peace, he stood straighter. "My mother believed in bridges between peoples. She died for that belief. For years, I thought her faith foolish." He found Mara in the crowd. "Recent events have shown me she was right. We cannot live in the past, fighting shadows, but neither can we accept theft disguised as progress. We seek only to share this land as the Creator intended, with respect for all who drink from the same streams. The defense's case crumbled when their star witness, the Apache scout who'd tried to shoot Kaya, admitted under pressure that Whitford had promised him leadership of the reservation Apaches once the troublemakers were eliminated. The web of corruption stretched from the territorial government to the railroad boardrooms, all focused on controlling water in a thirsty land. During a recess, Mara found herself cornered by Christopher in the hallway. "You did well," he admitted grudgingly. "But this changes nothing. Paper justice. White man's justice, it fails us before." "Then what would you have us do?" Mara asked. "Give up, accept no justice rather than imperfect justice. I would have us remember who we are, not forget ourselves chasing approval from those who see us as less than human." "Is that what you think Kaya's doing, forgetting himself?" Christopher's jaw worked. "I think he sees tomorrow through your eyes instead of ours. That's dangerous for a leader." "Or necessary," Sarah interjected, joining them with her now sleeping baby. "Christopher, you speak of remembering who we are, but who we are changes. We adapted when the horse came. When the Spanish came, why not adapt again? Because each adaptation costs us pieces of our soul, and rigid tradition costs us lives." Sarah countered, "I want my son to know his heritage, but I also want him to live long enough to pass it on. If that means standing in white men's courts, speaking truth, so be it." They returned for closing arguments. The prosecutor painted a picture of systematic deception and greed. The defense claimed misunderstanding and necessity. Through it all, Whitford sat stone-faced, confidence gradually eroding as his support evaporated. Then, just as the judge prepared to speak, Whitford stood abruptly. "You want truth," he snarled. "The truth is, this territory needs water for progress, for civilization. These savages squat on resources they can't properly use. Yes, I set traps. Yes, I burned that station. Because sometimes history needs a push." He wheeled on Kaya. "You think you've won, the railroad still comes. The settlers still need water. You've delayed the inevitable. Nothing more." His lawyer tried desperately to silence him, but Whitford shook him off. "And you," he pointed at Mara, "race traitor, spreading your legs for animals. You'll see what—" The crack of Avery's pistol butt against Whitford's skull ended the tirade. As guards dragged the unconscious man out, the judge cleared his throat. "Well, that was, illuminating." He shuffled papers unnecessarily. "Given the evidence presented and the defendant's own confession, this court finds Elias Whitford guilty on all charges. Sentencing will occur after he's examined for possible mental deficiency." The courtroom erupted. Some cheered, others muttered darkly. Mara felt only hollow relief justice served. But at what future cost? Outside, as various groups dispersed, Kaya found her by the courthouse steps. "It's not over," he said quietly. "Whitford spoke truth in his madness. Others will come. Then we'll face them. Together." She touched his hand briefly, mindful of watching eyes. "The council meets tonight." "Yes, to decide whether this changes our path forward." "And us?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. His fingers intertwined with hers. "Consequences be damned. Some things were decided in the aspens. The rest, we build day by day." "Nathan!" Christopher approached, using the Anglo name as a subtle insult. "The elders wait." Kaya nodded, but didn't release Mara's hand. "Tell them I come soon, with the news of another matter they must consider." Christopher's eyes narrowed, flicking between their joined hands and their faces. "What matter?" "A marriage," Kaya said simply, "if the bride agrees." Mara's heart stopped. Around them, the bustling courthouse crowd seemed to freeze. Christopher's face cycled through shock, anger, and something that might have been resignation. "The elders won't approve," he warned. "Then I'll convince them. or step down as chief, but I won't lead as half a man, denying what my heart knows is true." "Kaya," Mara breathed, "you can't sacrifice your position for love for the future I see when I look at you." He raised their joined hands to his lips. "That's no sacrifice. That's choosing life." Sarah appeared at Christopher's elbow, baby sleeping in his cradleboard. "The elders might surprise you," she said mildly. "Ada's been speaking to them about bridges and adaptation, about how some traditions honor the past while others chain us to it." "You knew," Christopher demanded. "Everyone with eyes knew." Sarah laughed. The question was whether they'd be brave enough to claim it publicly. As if summoned by the conversation, Ada herself emerged from the courthouse, moving with careful dignity through the dispersing crowd. She studied the joined hands, the defiant and hopeful faces, the gathering storm of gossip already building. "So," she said in Apache, then switched to English for Mara's benefit, "the bridge declares itself good. Hidden things fester. Spoken truths can be wrestled with properly." "Grandmother," Kaya began formally, but she waved him silent. "Tonight, the council meets. Bring your medicine woman. Let her speak for herself what future she sees." Ada's ancient eyes found Mara's. "But know this, child. The path you choose leads through fire. Your own people will call you traitor. Some of ours will never accept you fully. Children you bear will belong to neither world completely. Can you carry such weight?" Mara thought of her mother, dying of fever while trying to bridge two worlds, of Rosa, burned out for speaking truth, of the 1,000 small cuts that came from never quite belonging anywhere. Then she looked at Kaya, at Sarah's mixed-blood baby, at the possibility of something new being born from the ashes of old hatreds. "I've carried weight all my life," she said firmly. "At least this weight builds something instead of tearing down." Ada nodded slowly. "Then come tonight. Bring your medicine bag. If the council approves, there will be ceremonies, proper ones, to bind what the heart has already chosen." As the old woman walked away, Whitford's threats echoed in Mara's mind. Others would come. The railroad still pushed west. Water would always be scarce, contested, vital. But for now, in this moment, truth had won a victory. Love had declared itself in daylight, and somewhere between the rigid boundaries of race and tradition, space existed for those brave enough to claim it. "Ready?" Kaya asked, and she knew he meant for more than just tonight's council. "Ready," she confirmed, and together they walked toward whatever future their joined hands could build. Water returns to the old channels. The slot canyon carved through red stone like a wound in the earth. Mara pressed her back against the warm rock, medical bag clutched tight, listening to the echoes of pursuit bouncing off the narrow walls. 2 days since Whitford's conviction, 1 day since Christopher had split from the band, taking 20 warriors with him. "He's burning the granaries," Sarah had gasped, riding hard into camp at dawn. "Says if we bow to white justice, we deserve to starve like tame dogs." Now Kaya tracked his former warrior through a labyrinth of stone, trying to prevent civil war while Whitford's remaining sympathizers used the chaos to strike at vulnerable targets. The drought had broken at last, cruel irony, rain falling in sheets that turned dry washes into death traps. 3 riders ahead. Young Tom, one of Kaya's scouts, whispered urgently. "They have Christopher pinned near Eagle's throat." The narrow passage he'd named barely deserved recognition, a crack in stone, where flash floods had carved impossible geometries. If Christopher was trapped there with rain falling. "Circle west," Kaya commanded. "Draw them off. I'll go through." "That's suicide with water coming," Tom protested. "Then I'd better hurry." Kaya checked his rifle, then turned to Mara. "Stay with—" "No." She shouldered her bag. "If Christopher's hurt, you'll need me. And if he's not—" She touched the knife at her belt. One of Ada's gifts. Maybe he'll listen to reason from someone who understands being caught between worlds. They moved swiftly through the canyon maze, the sound of rushing water growing louder. The sky, visible only in narrow strips overhead, had turned the purple black of deep bruising. Thunder rolled across the stone like war drums. The scene at Eagle's throat stopped them cold. Christopher stood on a ledge 20 feet up, blood streaming from a gash in his side. Below, 3 of Whitford's men had him trapped, not the hired guns they'd expected, but Apache turncoats who'd thrown in with the mining interests. "Come down, Christopher," one called in their own language. "Whitford promises leadership of the new reservation. Real power. Not this dancing to white tunes like your Nathan." "I'd rather die honest than live as a lapdog," Christopher snarled back, though his voice carried pain. The rushing sound intensified. Up canyon, a wall of brown water appeared flash flood, carrying trees and stones and death. "The water!" Mara shouted. "Everyone climb!" The 3 turncoats spun, saw the flood, and scrambled for high ground. But Christopher, wounded and weak, slipped on the wet stone. He would have fallen directly into the torrent if Kaya hadn't lunged forward, catching his wrist just as the water struck. The force nearly tore them both from the wall. Mara grabbed Kaya's belt, bracing against a stone outcrop as muddy water rose with terrifying speed. Christopher dangled over the churning flood, Kaya's grip the only thing between him and certain death. "Let go," Christopher gasped. "Save yourself." "We save each other," Kaya gritted out, muscles straining. "That's what brothers do." Mara wrapped the leather cord from her bag around both men's wrists, binding them together. The symbolism wasn't lost, the same type of cord used in the bride path, now serving as lifeline. With desperate strength, they hauled Christopher up just as a massive cottonwood trunk swept past where he dangled. The 3 turncoats hadn't been as fortunate. Mara glimpsed one clinging to a rock outcrop downstream before the current took him. They huddled on the narrow ledge, watching nature's fury remake the canyon floor. Christopher pressed a hand to his bleeding side, face gray with pain and something else, shame. "Why?" he asked finally. "I split the band, burned our stores, called you weak, corrupted by white influence." "Because you're my brother," Kaya said simply. "In war, in peace, in foolishness and wisdom. That doesn't change." Mara was already working on Christopher's wound, a deep gash from a glancing bullet, bleeding freely but not immediately fatal. "Hold still," she murmured, cleaning it with the last of her water. "This needs stitching." "Let it bleed," Christopher muttered, fitting in for a fool who let anger guide him. "Stop that," Mara said sharply. "You're not the first to choose rage over patience. Won't be the last. The question is what you choose next." As she worked, the flood began to recede, leaving a transformed landscape below. What had been dusty canyon floor now ran with precious water, filling pools that had been dry for months. "Look," Kaya pointed to the far wall where ancient petroglyphs emerged as rain washed away years of dust. "The old signs, water and corn, war and peace, all together. Our ancestors knew life holds all things in balance." Pretty words. Christopher winced as Mara tied off a stitch. But Whitford was right about one thing. More will come. The railroad, settlers, soldiers. This victory in court changes nothing. "It changes everything." A new voice interrupted. Lieutenant Avery appeared around a bend, uniform soaked but intact. Behind him, Tom led a group of Apache scouts and soldiers working together. "Lieutenant," Kaya stood carefully, hand on his weapon. "At ease, Chief." Avery's scarred face showed exhaustion, but also something like hope. "We've been tracking the last of Whitford's gang. Seems the flood took care of that problem." He studied Christopher with professional interest. "This the one who burned the granaries?" "This is a wounded man under my protection," Kaya said firmly. Avery nodded slowly. "Understood. But the territorial governor wants to meet with all Apache leaders, including dissidents. Says it's time for a real treaty. Not just words on paper that Washington ignores. Treaties, Christopher spat, then gasped as the movement pulled his stitches. How many treaties have you broken? All of them, Avery admitted bluntly. But this governor's different. Saw his own ranch dry up in the drought, lost his eldest son to water disputes. He understands what Whitford nearly cost everyone Apache, Mexican, Anglo alike. And he proposes, Kaya asked, joint management of water resources, Apache knowledge of the land combined with engineering expertise, shared prosperity instead of winner-take-all. Avery pulled out a leather document case, miraculously dry. The draft agreement. No removal to reservations. Traditional lands recognized in exchange for water-sharing compacts. Christopher laughed bitterly. They'll never honor it. Maybe not, Mara said, finishing her bandaging. But what's the alternative? Fight until the last Apache falls, let the desert reclaim everything while we kill each other over puddles. She stood, addressing both brothers. I've lived between worlds my whole life. It's painful, lonely, full of compromise, but it's also rich with possibility. My mother's people, the Cherokee, they tried both ways, fighting to the last and adapting to survive. Guess which ones lived to pass on their stories? You sound like Ada, Christopher muttered. Good. She's the wisest person I know. Mara began packing her supplies. And she'd tell you that survival isn't surrender. It's choosing which battles matter. The journey back to camp took them through a transformed landscape. Rain had awakened the desert flowers blooming with desperate speed. Frogs singing from new pools, the earth itself exhaling petrichor and promise. At Deer Creek, the water ran strong for the first time in months. The camp buzzed with activity. News of Christopher's rescue had preceded them, along with word of the treaty proposal. Warriors cleaned weapons while women prepared food. Children played in puddles, everyone talking at once. Ada sat in the council circle, studying the draft agreement with sharp eyes. Other elders flanked her, faces ranging from hopeful to skeptical. When Christopher limped in, supported between Kaya and Mara, silence fell. So, Ada said mildly, the prodigal returns. Tell us, angry one, what did you find in your search for war? Christopher straightened painfully. I found brothers who wouldn't let me fall. I found water returning to dead earth. I found, he glanced at Mara, wisdom in unexpected places. And do you still say your chief is corrupted by white influence? I say. Christopher chose his words carefully. My chief sees farther than my anger allowed me to see. Whether that's corruption or evolution, I leave to wiser heads. Ada smiled slightly. Good. Humility makes the pride bearable. She held up the treaty papers. This needs discussion. All voices, even angry ones, especially angry ones. What followed was democracy in its rawest form. Every adult had the right to speak, from warriors to grandmothers, former enemies to newfound allies. The debate raged through the night, trust versus suspicion, hope against experience, survival weighed against identity. Mara found herself called upon repeatedly to translate, not just language, but concepts, how water rights worked in American law, how joint management might function, what medical care could mean if Apache knowledge combined with Western training. You're asking us to trust those who've lied before, one elder stated. Yes, Kaya acknowledged, but also to verify. Apache scouts working with Army engineers, our people learning their laws to ensure compliance, their people learning our ways to understand the land. And if they break faith again? Christopher asked, his voice stronger after Mara's pain medicine. Then we're no worse off than now, Sarah interjected, baby sleeping against her chest. But if they keep faith, even partially, our children gain time to grow strong in both worlds. Near dawn, the vote came. Not unanimous, nothing important ever was, but decisive. The band would enter negotiations, with conditions. Apache water rights recognized first, joint patrols to prevent future Whitfords, and significantly, intermarriage recognized under both legal systems. That last had been Ada's contribution, her eyes twinkling as she watched Kaya and Mara try not to look at each other. As the council dispersed, Christopher approached them. "The marriage thing, that was for you two." "Among others," Kaya said diplomatically. Christopher studied Mara for a long moment. "In the canyon, when the water came, you could have let me fall. Would have solved many problems." "I'm a healer," Mara said simply. "I don't let people fall if I can help it, even stubborn fools who burn food stores during a drought." "Especially those," Christopher said, something softening in his expression. "They need healing most." He limped away before the moment could become too maudlin, calling for his warriors to prepare for the journey to Fort Lowell. The treaty negotiations would be complex, requiring all their skills. "Think it will work?" Mara asked quietly, watching the camp stir to life in the morning sun. "The treaty." Kaya pulled her close, mindful of watching eyes but past caring. "Perhaps, perhaps not. But the trying matters. Building trust, learning each other's ways, finding water in the desert of mistrust." Speaking of water, Sarah approached with a clay jar. "From Deer Creek, the first clean flow in months. Ada says to bottle it for the wedding. Water that survived drought makes the strongest blessings." Mara took the jar carefully, touched by the gesture. "Tell Ada I'm honored. Though I should mention, no one's officially asked me to marry them yet, just announced it to councils and courts." Kaya dropped to one knee there in the morning light, in full view of the camp. "Margaret Collins, called Mara, healer of bodies and bridges between worlds. Will you accept my blanket permanently, share my fire, my people, my complicated future?" "Only if you share mine," she answered. "My stubborn patience, my position between worlds, my inability to brew decent coffee." "I've tasted your coffee," he said solemnly. "Still worth it?" She laughed, pulling him to his feet. "Then yes, yes to all of it." The camp erupted in celebration, Apache victory cries, mixing with Mexican ballads and even some Anglo hurrahs from Avery's soldiers who'd stayed for breakfast. It was chaos and hope and complicated joy, like the desert after rain. Christopher watched from the edge of camp, his expression unreadable. Finally, he approached. "For the record," he said stiffly, "I still think you're making a mistake. Both of you." "Noted," Kaya replied. "But," Christopher continued with visible effort, "I'll stand witness at the wedding. Someone should be there to object at the proper moment." At their alarmed looks, he almost smiled. "Joking, mostly. The point is, right or wrong, you're family now. Both of you. We protect family." He walked away before they could respond, shouting orders about breaking camp. The journey to negotiate the future began with the rising sun. "Ready?" Kaya asked, as he seemed to ask at every threshold. Mara looked around at the controlled chaos, Apache and soldiers working side by side. Christopher organizing despite his wounds. Children playing in puddles while their parents planned for an uncertain tomorrow. "Ready," she confirmed, and meant it. The water had returned to the old channels, but it flowed toward new destinations. And sometimes, in a land of drought and division, that was the greatest miracle of all. Before dawn, after the vow, the first rains of spring painted the desert in impossible colors, purple lupines carpeting the valleys, golden poppies climbing the hillsides, and the precious green of new grass where cattle and horses could graze. 6 months had passed since the treaty signing, and Mara stood in the doorway of the expanded lodge, watching the sunrise paint the Chiricahua Mountains rose and gold. Inside, Sarah's baby, now walking with determined wobbles, played with carved wooden horses while his mother worked at her loom. The design taking shape showed the new pattern of their lives, Apache diamonds intertwined with settler stars, Mexican flowers blooming between them. It would be a gift for the child growing in Mara's belly, the one she'd thought impossible until Ada's medicines and time had proved the doctors wrong. "You're up early?" Kaya's voice came from behind her, warm with sleep and contentment. His arms wrapped around her expanded waist, hands splaying protectively over their miracle. "She's dancing," Mara murmured, placing his hands where tiny feet pushed against her ribs. "Always most active at dawn." Kaya corrected with the confidence of a man who'd already named sons in his mind. "And he dances because he hears his father's horses returning." True enough. A dust cloud on the horizon announced riders approaching. The joint patrols had become routine Apache scouts and Army surveyors mapping water resources together, ensuring the treaty's promises translated into sustainable reality. Christopher led this group, his authority among the warriors now unquestioned despite or perhaps because of his past rebellion. He'd become the treaty's fiercest enforcer, knowing better than most the cost of letting anger override wisdom. "Good news and complicated news," he announced, dismounting with the easy grace that marked a healed body and spirit. "The good, we've located 3 new springs in the northern canyons. The complicated, the railroad wants to discuss routing through Skeleton Pass." "Let them discuss," Sarah said calmly, not looking up from her weaving. "Discussion means nothing without consensus. That's what the treaty says." "Since when do they honor?" Christopher caught himself. Old habits dying hard. "You're right. We use their laws against them if needed." Lieutenant Avery emerged from the patrol, dusty but smiling. He'd been promoted to captain but refused transfer, claiming someone needed to keep an eye on this experiment in controlled chaos. His real reason sat in the shade, teaching Apache children their letters Rosa Delgado, who'd returned after the treaty to establish the territory's first integrated school. "Mrs. Nejoni," Avery greeted Mara formally, though his eyes twinkled. "How's our future diplomat?" "Kicking like a mule and stealing my sleep," Mara replied, much like her father during negotiations. "His father?" Kaya insisted, which had become their running joke. Ada claimed she knew but wouldn't tell, enjoying their anticipation too much. The morning passed in familiar rhythms. Mara held clinic under the Ramada, treating everything from snake bites to prenatal care. Her patients now included Apache, Mexican shepherds, and even some Anglo settlers who'd overcome prejudice in favor of competent medicine. She worked alongside Ada and 2 young Apache women she was training, blending traditional knowledge with modern techniques. "Hold him still," she instructed as they treated a settler's son who'd tangled with a barrel cactus. The boy's father watched nervously as Apache hands tended his child, but pain had a way of erasing artificial boundaries. "You're the one married to the Apache chief?" the man asked uncertainly. "I am." Mara didn't look up from extracting spines. "Is that a problem?" "No, ma'am, just folks in town talk. Say it ain't natural." "Neither is living in a desert without understanding how to find water," Mara observed. "Yet here we all are, adapting. Your son will heal fine. These ladies know more about cactus injuries than any Eastern doctor." By afternoon, clouds gathered on the horizon, not the violent storms of last year, but the steady, soaking rains that promised good grazing and full streams. Kaya found Mara resting in their lodge, reviewing her notes on medicinal plants with one hand, while the other rubbed her lower back. "Time to stop for today," he said firmly, removing the journal. "Ada says too much thinking makes the baby restless." "Ada says everything makes the baby restless," Mara laughed, including her father's singing. "My singing is traditional, powerful. The child responds to his heritage." "Her heritage includes my mother's lullabies, too," Mara reminded him. "Cherokee and Welsh mixed together. Poor thing won't know which direction to face during ceremonies." "Every direction," Kaya said seriously, settling beside her. "That's the point. Our child will belong everywhere, limited nowhere." A commotion outside interrupted them. Tom burst through the door flap, face flushed with urgency. Riders from town. They say Whitford escaped." The name fell like a stone into still water. Whitford had been serving his sentence in Yuma Territorial Prison, supposedly secure until his distant parole. But money and hatred could open many doors. "How?" Kaya was already reaching for his rifle. "Bought guards, stole horses, left 3 days ago heading this direction." Tom swallowed hard. "He swore revenge at trial. On you, on Mara, on everyone who testified." "Double the watches," Christopher ordered, appearing in the doorway. "Women and children to the inner camp. Warriors on all approaches." "No." Mara stood carefully, one hand supporting her belly. "That's what he wants us cowering, afraid. We've built something here. I won't let one bitter man tear it down." Mara, Kaya began. "I'm not foolish." She cut him off. "We take precautions, but tomorrow's the spring gathering. Apache, Mexican, and Anglo families coming together to celebrate the water's return. If we cancel for Whitford, we hand him a victory." Ada entered, having heard the news. The young one speaks wisdom. "Fear is a poison that spreads faster than any drought. We prepare, but we don't retreat." So they prepared. Guards posted, weapons checked, evacuation routes planned, but also tables set up for the feast, decorations hung, musicians tuning instruments. The spring gathering had become a symbol of the new peace, and symbols mattered. That night, as rain pattered softly on the lodge skins, Mara lay wakeful despite exhaustion. The baby had finally settled, but her mind raced with possibilities. Whitford loose, seeking vengeance. The fragile trust they'd built over months, could it survive targeted violence? "You're thinking too loud," Kaya murmured against her hair. "I can hear the wheels turning." "I'm scared," she admitted. "Not for myself, but for this." She gestured to encompass everything: their child, their blended family, their careful peace. "We've built something beautiful and precarious as a soap bubble, one pinprick. Then we make it stronger than bubbles." He shifted to face her in the darkness. "Every day someone chooses to trust across old boundaries. We add strength. Every child who learns both languages, every shared meal, every problem solved together, these are threads in a web that won't break for one man's hatred." Morning dawned clear after the night's rain. The camp bustled with preparation, and despite the underlying tension, excitement built. By midday, wagons and riders arrived from all directions. Rosa supervised the school children's choir Apache, Mexican and Anglo voices blending in songs from all three traditions. Sarah's weavings displayed alongside settler quilts and Mexican embroidery. The smell of cooking filled the air: venison stew, corn cakes, beans with chili, fresh bread from the Dutch ovens. "It's working," Avery said quietly to Mara as they watched the mingling crowds. "By God, it's actually working. Today it is." Mara agreed. "Ask me again in a year, or 5, or when our children are grown." The celebration peaked at sunset with traditional dances. Apache crown dancers told the story of creation, while Mexican guitarists provided counterpoint. Even some Anglo settlers joined in, awkward but willing. Mara watched from her seat of honor, hands resting on her belly, feeling the baby respond to the drums with kicks and rolls. Then, between one breath and the next, Whitford appeared. He stood at the edge of the firelight, gaunt from prison, eyes burning with the particular madness of a man who'd lost everything to his own hatred. In his hands, a Winchester rifle, aimed directly at Kaya, who stood exposed, leading the ceremonies. "Thought you'd won," Whitford called out, voice cracking with disuse. "Thought you'd steal what's mine and live happy. But I learned something in Yuma. Learned that killing the snake means crushing the eggs too." The rifle swung toward Mara. Time slowed. She saw Kaya diving toward her, Christopher drawing his sidearm, Avery shouting orders, but clearest of all, She saw Rosa's schoolchildren standing frozen between Whitford and his target. If he fired, if anyone fired, innocents would fall. Mr. Whitford, Mara said, surprised by her own calm. You're just in time for dinner. You look hungry. The rifle wavered. What? I said you look hungry. When did you last eat a proper meal? She stood slowly, deliberately placing herself more firmly between him and the children. There's plenty, even for uninvited guests. You think I came for food? Spittle flew from his cracked lips. I came for justice. No, Christopher said quietly, and everyone turned to stare. The former rebel warrior had moved silently behind Whitford, but instead of attacking, he simply stood witness. You came for revenge. I know the difference. I've tasted both. Justice would be you in prison, Mara continued, still in that eerily calm voice. Justice would be restoration for those you've wronged. This, she gestured to the rifle. This is just an angry man making everyone as miserable as himself. You took everything, Whitford's voice broke. My position, my future, Your own greed took those things, Ada interrupted, stepping forward despite the danger. Just as my anger once took my son's father from him, just as hate took Kaya's mother. How many more must hatred take before we say enough? The rifles shook now, Whitford's rage warring with exhaustion and something else, the bewilderment of a man facing compassion where he'd expected fear. I have nothing left, he said, almost wonderingly. Then you have a choice, Kaya said, finally finding his voice. Die here, achieving nothing but more sorrow, or live, maybe find something worth building instead of destroying. Pretty words from a savage, Whitford snarled, but the heat had gone out of it. Pretty words from a human to another human. Kaya corrected. That's all any of us are in the end. The standoff stretched taut. Then, from the crowd of children, Carlos, the boy from the very beginning, now healed and growing, stepped forward. In his hands, a plate of food. Mister, he said in careful English, I was caught in a trap once. Hurt bad, but Aunt Mara fixed me. Maybe, he glanced back at Mara, maybe she can fix you too. The plate trembled in small hands. The rifle trembled in gnarled ones. The moment balanced on a knife's edge. Whitford's weapon lowered, then fell from nerveless fingers. He sank to his knees, sobs tearing from his throat, the sound of a man breaking, but perhaps breaking open rather than apart. Avery moved quickly to secure the rifle, while others rushed to help. But Mara reached Whitford first, kneeling despite her bulk, physician's instincts overriding everything else. You need water, she said briskly. Food, rest, medical attention for those infected sores. Then, she met his broken gaze. Then we figure out what comes next. They never returned to the celebration. Not fully, but something else emerged from that interrupted evening, a story that would be told around fires for generations. How hatred came calling and was met with food. How a child's courage weighed more than a man's rage. How sometimes the greatest victory was refusing to fight at all. Whitford was taken to Fort Lowell, not as prisoner but as patient. He would return to prison eventually, but with something he'd lacked before the knowledge that another way existed. Some said he died there still bitter. Others claimed he became a model prisoner, teaching reading to fellow inmates. The truth, like most truths, probably lay somewhere between. 2 weeks later, as spring flowers reached their peak, Mara's labor began. It was long and difficult, testing every skill Ada and Sarah possessed. But as dawn broke over the mountains, a cry announced success. A girl, Ada proclaimed, placing the squalling infant in Mara's exhausted arms. With her mother's stubborn spirit already. Told you, Mara whispered to Kaya, who looked appropriately stunned by the tiny perfection of his daughter. She's perfect, he breathed. What do we call her? Mara had thought about this through the long night of contractions. Elena, she said finally. For the light, but also She smiled at the gathering crowd of their extended family. Also, her Apache name should mean bridge between waters, because that's what she is. Ada nodded approvingly. I know just the name. It will be given at the proper time. As the baby nursed for the first time, the spring sun streamed through the lodge opening outside. Life continued in its new patterns. Apache and settler children playing together, joint patrols heading out, Rosa's school bell ringing for morning lessons. Was it worth it? Christopher asked quietly from the doorway. All the pain, the uncertainty, the price of standing between worlds? Mara looked at her daughter, this impossible miracle, with Kaya's eyes and her stubborn chin. Thought of all who died for old hatreds and all who now lived in new hope. Remembered her mother's words about bridges and belonging. Ask me in 20 years, she said, when she's grown and deciding her own path. But in her heart, she already knew the answer. Every bridge began with a single stone placed in rushing water. Every piece started with one extended hand. Every future grew from seeds planted in difficult soil. The baby settled into sleep. Tiny fist wrapped around her father's finger. Outside, the desert bloomed with temporary beauty, teaching its eternal lesson that life found a way, even in the harshest conditions, especially then. Water had returned to the old channels, carrying new life to patient earth, and in a land where water meant everything. That was blessing enough for any beginning. Thank you all for listening to this story of love and hope in the Old West. I'm curious to know where in the world you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect across the miles. Just like Mara and Kaya bridged different worlds, if you enjoyed this tale, please subscribe to Wild West Night, hit that like button, and don't forget to click the hype button so more people can discover these stories of the American frontier. Until next time, partners.